We have been in this series now, this is week 4, where we're looking at Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 34, and we're talking about this concept of treasure in heaven. And Jesus is addressing the challenges between the treasure of the world, or the love of money, or mammon, is one, in some translations would put it, and where your heart is, where he is concerned. And so we looked at some of the challenges of wealth and poverty. Last week we talked about it is the condition of, or the direction of our heart that is most important, and how if our heart is right, all of the other things fall in place. But when our heart is wrong, it doesn't really matter because they don't fall in place. And so today I want to talk about this concept of eyes, or the eyes of treasure, how our eyes affect the things that are going on in our life, how they affect our heart, if you will, how they decide where our treasure is. And so the portion in Matthew chapter 6 says this. It says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. Now, I think there are some people that can see perfectly fine. I get comments from time to time, like they say it's weird that you take your glasses off to read. I wear my glasses to see you, not to read, okay? Like I can read perfectly fine. I actually have better than 20/20 vision reading up close. I just can't see you, and I don't want to wear progressive lenses or bifocals, and so I just wear single vision lenses, and so I wear them for distance so I can see you clearly, but when I read, I take them off. But there are some people who don't realize they can't see, right? You know, and Jesus talks about 3 different kinds. That's what we're going to talk about today. He talks about people who can see well, people who can't see well, and then people who can't see well but don't know they can't see well, right? And so we're gonna address all 3 of those today, because there are real challenges with what we see. People say seeing is believing, but I would tend to disagree with that. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of science that would tell us that even eyewitnesses are extremely faulty. The Bible gives us some indications that some things are so important that you shouldn't take one person's word for it. If there are not 2 eyewitnesses, then you shouldn't act upon it, because one single eyewitness could be so flawed that they miss everything, because we're looking at things through a particular lens. There are a number of reasons why eyewitnesses are faulty or flawed. The first one is, most of the time when we're an eyewitness to something, we weren't prepared to see it to begin with, right? So we weren't sitting there going, okay, he's getting ready to hit them. There's getting ready to be a car accident. I'm going to pay attention really close. And we watch every facet of it. Most of the time, we're caught by surprise and we only catch pieces of it. And so our unpreparedness makes it very difficult. Another one is there's memory contamination. Sometimes people will say to you, you saw this, right? And in your mind, you go, well, maybe that is what I saw. And you respond positively. How questions are phrased affects how people respond. There's this classic research done in 1974 where they showed a group of students 7 videos of traffic accidents, each one of the videos ranged from 5 to 30 seconds long. After showing them the footage, the researchers asked all the students the same question, but with slightly different wording. So they asked them the same exact question, really changing one word. About how fast were the cars going when they blanked each other? Smashed, collided, bumped, hit, or contacted. The speed estimates the students gave were affected by the verb used to ask the question. For example, when the word contact was used, students estimated slower speeds than when the words collide or smash were used. It wasn't that the video changed, it was just the question was changed and how it was asked, and so they got a different response. The other thing, like, could be poor eyesight. Like, some people just can't see, and when we see, we don't see the same thing, right? There were some famous pictures around on the internet. Here's one of them that you might have seen. All right, how many of you have seen this? All right, a few of you. All right, good. So how many of you see gray and teal sneaker? Raise your hand. Raise it up high. Okay. All right, how many of you see a pink and white sneaker? Raise your hand. Go ahead. Hold your hand up. Don't just see y'all like, I ain't the majority, so I can't raise my hand. You understand that? So look, there at least 10% of the people saw pink and white, while the majority of you saw green and teal. And the reality is this sneaker is pink and white. Yeah, the sneaker is pink and white. Now, I see gray and teal. Okay, I'm just telling you, I see gray and teal, but the sneaker is pink and white. And it has a lot to do with the background. It has a lot to do with the lighting. It has everything to do with how you see it. And what I wanted you to understand is there are people in here who see pink and white. Look, I see husbands and wives in here. It is pink. I told you it was pink, right? Right? That becomes a problem. Right? Because some people say, I see it this way, and it's clear, right? Because if you see gray and teal like I do, it's clear to you that it's gray and teal. By the way, that's a Vans tennis shoe, and they never sold a gray and teal one. It's pink and white. But if you see pink and white, you're like, how are you seeing gray and teal? And you can't look at it now and see. There was another one that had a dress. Right? Y'all remember the dress? And me and my wife both saw different colors. And there's lots of theories as to why. It could be the color. It could be the lighting. It could be right brain, left brain. There's lots of theories about why. Most of them are bogus. That's what I'm telling you. The thing I've learned in marriage is that we see a lot of things differently. We can both be looking at the same exact situation, the same exact problem, the same exact thing. And this is what I see, and this is what she sees. Well, the same is true when it comes to worldly treasure. Some of you will look at something and you'll go, this is right. This is what I see. And others of you will look at the same thing and go, no, I see something completely different. And so today I want to talk to you about whether your eyesight is clear and whether it's not, some ways that you can determine that, and maybe I'll get you out of here at a reasonable time. So here's the first thing. Let's talk about the healthy eye. I think that's where we have to start because that's where Jesus starts. He starts talking about the healthy eye. And translators struggle with this concept of healthy and unhealthy because there were words to describe a health, or this word healthy, or there are words to describe unhealthy, but they look completely different, right? And they have different meanings. And so you have to look at how they wrestled with this concept of healthy and unhealthy, good and bad, or good and evil, or single and evil. And we're going to look at some of those translations in just a minute, but they were wrestling with this. And Jesus begins by saying, your eye is the lamp of your body. So they understood that concept. Like they understood this little clay vessel that would have had oil in it and a wick, and they would light the wick and it would light up the room. They understood that concept. So your eye lights your body. But then Jesus says something completely different. He says, if you have a good eye or a healthy eye, your body's filled with light. But if you have an unhealthy eye, your body is filled with darkness, and that becomes a problem. So let's look at some of these translations and how they are different. So the New American Standard Bible, which is a word-for-word literal in translation, it says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear, all right, notice this translation doesn't use the word healthy. It uses the word clear. So if your eye is clear, your whole body is full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? So the ESV version says it like this. It says, the eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. So here he uses the word healthy. But if your eye is bad, so here he uses the word bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And then the King James Version, which I grew up on, says this. It says, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye, I'm glad we don't use thine that much anymore. If therefore thine eye be single, not healthy, not good, not bad. If your eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body will be full of darkness. Here he says, if your eye is single, right? So meaning you're not seeing double. You're not seeing two or three of the same thing. If you're seeing a singular thing, that's how the King James refers to it. And so it shows you that there is this wrestling match that's going on with how do we interpret what Jesus here is talking about, whether he's talking, what is healthy, what is clear, what is a single eye. So the eye being single would suggest that your vision is not blurry or doubled. If you've ever had double vision or blurred vision, you would understand this concept. Like everybody else is seeing something clear, you're not seeing it as clear. And it can create quite a problem in your life. And so Jesus is contrasting this idea of an unhealthy eye with a healthy eye, or a clear eye with an unclear eye, or a single eye with what might be double vision. And you can get this picture of an evil eye that might be injured. Perhaps it's infected. Maybe somebody hit you, it's swollen and you can't see very clear, or you're seeing things that you should not see or aren't as clear as they should be. So it's not too much of a stretch here for us to think in terms of this being a swollen eye or a closed eye and an open eye. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the language that is written here, you would understand maybe that is what Jesus is talking about. And this idea of open is apparently this figurative expression that's used frequently in the Bible about people who are generous. So people who have open eyes are generous people. So this verse in Matthew chapter 20 says this, verses 15 and 16. Can I see that on the screen? It says, is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first, then those who are first will be last. So here Jesus is telling this story about all of these people who the vineyard owner or the master had got to come work, and some worked all day and some worked most of the day and some worked only a couple of hours, but the master or the vineyard owner or the landowner pays them all the same thing. And people are upset about it. They're like, why aren't we getting the same thing that they're getting? And the response was, why should you be jealous? Because I'm kind to other people. Why should you be jealous? Because I am being generous. That's the way the New American Standard Version translates it. It says it's the opposite of generosity is jealousy. And we're going to talk about how jealousy affects closed eyes. But an open eye is this generous eye. You can see some of this same language used in this generosity being portrayed in the concepts of being clear-eyed and open-sighted. But jealousy is this blurred eye or closed-sighted kind of thing. And you find some of this same language in James chapter 1 where it says this. It says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you, and he will not rebuke you for asking. So this concept of generosity or openness or healthiness, is much the same word translated in each place. As a matter of fact, you would find Paul using this word in Romans chapter 12 verse 8, 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 2, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 11, where he talks about giving generously or being open, this concept of an open eye. So this is what I would tell you. A generous eye is a healthy eye. A generous eye is a healthy eye. And if you want to know, like, this is a test that you can apply to yourself. Am I generous to people? Am I generous with my time, my talents, my abilities? But a generous eye is a healthy eye. Here's the second point. Let's talk about the unhealthy eye. The unhealthy eye, we've kind of touched on already that not necessarily the opposite of generosity as jealousy, but it has a lot to do with it. Jesus says this in verse 23. He says, but when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. This is that struggle. Like he says, if your eye is unhealthy, it affects everything else about you. Jealousy creates blindness. I don't know if you have heard that terminology used before, but if you're not careful, jealousy will cause you not to be able to reason about anything. When you're jealous of somebody else's plight in life, something someone else has achieved, something someone else has, it will blind you to some of the reason, and especially the spiritual things that you need in your life. Notice, if you follow the rest of Jesus' statement, he says, when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. You see, this word picture of an unhealthy eye speaks to us about our ability to clearly identify the difference between earthly treasure and heavenly treasure. Think about the times. This isn't a raise your hand or an opportunity for you to acknowledge. I just want you to internally think about the times where you have looked at somebody and said, they don't deserve X because. Maybe they got a job or promotion or a new house, and your thought is, why did they get that? They don't deserve it because maybe they didn't work hard. Maybe they're not honest. Maybe they had done something wrong. Maybe they have a past. It doesn't really matter. But in your heart, you may not say I'm jealous, but jealousy is creeping out when you say they don't deserve X because they have done this. Doesn't really matter what that is. We get frustrated because sometimes what we desire comes boiling out in other people's lives, and we want it. You see, there are things that our jealousy shows up when we criticize how other people spend money. Oh, well, if I had that money, I would do good with it. How do you know what you would do with it? And how do you get to determine whether what they're doing is not for good? Right? And we don't call it jealousy, but it is jealousy that is oozing out of us, creeping out of us, showing up in our lives in ways that we don't think they should have. When we think someone else is better than us because they have achieved something or they've gotten some material thing, we recognize, or we should recognize, that we are becoming jealous of what they have. If you go back to that Verse 15 of Matthew chapter 20, it says, is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Right? Who are you to be over here saying, well, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. Why are you doing that? He says, should you be jealous because I am kind or generous to others? He's basically saying, it's my money. If I want to pay them the same for 2 hours as you're getting paid for 12 hours, just get over it. And that's hard for people to do, right? Sometimes, right? Sometimes we have more opinion about everybody else's money than we do our own. Right? Maybe if we had strong enough opinions about our own, we would be able to spend it on things that we wanted to spend it on. Jesus tells us that we have to be careful not to find ourselves with a closed eye or a jealous heart or closed hands. As a matter of fact, in Deuteronomy, in part of the law, what it says, but if there are any poor Israelites in your towns when you arrive in the land the Lord is giving you. So he says, if you show up at a town and you don't even know these people and they're God's chosen people, he says, if you show up there, he says, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Instead, be generous and lend them whatever they need. Do not be mean-spirited and refuse someone a loan because the year of canceling debts is close at hand. Like, I am so glad they put this in there. You got to understand, so every so many years, all the debt was forgiven. Like if they owed you $100,000 or $10,000, you just wrote it off. And in the law, it says, just because it's year 6 and on year 7, right, you're going to have to write it off. You can't say, well, no, Lord, it's kind of too close to the end. If I was able to draw interest over 6 years, Lord, I would do it. But not on year 6 or year 5, Lord, I'm going to lose money. He says, no, you can't do that. He says, if you refuse to make a loan to the needy and the needy person cries out to the Lord, you will be considered guilty of sin. He says this, give generously to the poor, not grudgingly, for the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. So here's the second thing I want you to remember today. A jealous eye is an unhealthy eye. But the last thing I want to talk about is this thing I've been wrestling with. This is the piece of it that I have wrestled with the most personally. And is this concept of the unhealthiest eye. It is this concept that there is something worse than being blind. There's something worse than not being able to see clearly. There's something worse than having double vision. It is thinking you can see, but you can't. The second part of verse 23 says this. It says, if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. He says, if you think you can see, but you can't, how much trouble do you find yourself in? I read some interesting anecdotes about this. Seneca, who was a Stoic philosopher, says in one of his letters, he tells about a slave in his house who suddenly became blind. And he wrote this, now, incredible as this story seems, it is really true that she is unconscious of her blindness. So she's blind, but won't acknowledge that she's blind, and consequently begs her attendant to go elsewhere because the house is dark. Can I go to another room because this room's too dark, I can't see. Can I go to another room? When in reality, the problem was she was blind. But you may be sure of this, at which we laugh at her, it happens to us all. No one understands that he is covetous. The blind seek for a guide. We wander about without a guide. So he says there's this difference. He says the blind people at least ask for help. The people who think they can see won't even ask anybody for help. And Ruskin writes in the book Modern Painters, he says this, it says, seeing falsely is worse than blindness. A man who is too dim-sighted to discern the road from the ditch may feel which is which. So he's like, if a man can't see very good, he can feel around and figure out, okay, the ditch is over here and the road is over here. All right? But he goes on. But if the ditch appears manifestly to him to be the road, and the road to be the ditch, what shall become of him? False seeing is unseeing on the negative side of blindness. He says on the opposite side of blindness is false seeing. And that is what I consider to be the unhealthiest eye. As a matter of fact, Jesus would tell us that when we're fooled, it is what we find ourselves seeing things that really aren't there. James wrote it like this. He says, but don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. We live in a culture that has determined for themselves, and they are imposing it on the church, and some within the church are succumbing to it, to where we can see it on the paper and know what the scripture says, but we have been fooled into believing that this is not true. And we're doing what we choose, how we choose, when we choose, and we believe that there are no consequences of it. If the church is not careful, we will continue to do whatever we want to do while ignoring the word of God and pretend like we're going to be okay, only to wake up one day and realize we don't have what we used to have. We're not as strong as we used to be. We don't have the witness that we used to have. We don't have the Spirit of God that we used to have upon us. We have become blind, and worse than blind, we think we're right. It's a dangerous place to be wrong and think you're right. I don't know if you've ever been there before. I've been there a couple of times where I was sure I was right. Right? But I was as wrong as I possibly could be. There's nothing worse than thinking the ditch is the road and the road is the ditch. I've ended up in the ditch a few times because I was sure that the ditch was the road. And if we're not careful, we will consistently find ourselves in the ditch because not only are we can't see. You see, I appreciate people who say, I don't know what to do. Will you help me? Will you guide me? Will you mentor me? The frustrating people are saying, this is the way it ought to be when they're completely wrong. a very dangerous place to be. There's this story in the scriptures that I think will help illustrate this. It's about a man named Samson. It shows up in Judges chapter 16. Samson has met this woman named Delilah, and it's a famous story. It's not an unfamous story. Samson and Delilah is what I call extra biblical material. It's stuff that people on the outside of the church, they know who Samson is, right? She keeps asking him, what has your strength? What has your strength? What has your strength? And he keeps playing games with her. Some of the games seem ridiculous, where they weave his hair into all these looms. Like, what's he thinking? Like, that don't sound like a joke to me, right? But anyway, it says this. It says in verse 17, it says, finally, Samson shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth. So she sent for the Philistine rulers. Come back one more time, she said, for he has finally told me the secret. So the Philistine rulers returned with their money in hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. Now, you got to be sleeping. Every time I read this story, I think, man, he was sleeping hard. It says, in this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. When she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you, he woke up and he thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. Samson's problem was he thought, I can do this. But he was so blind that he couldn't even see that God had departed from his life. I don't know, but I look around me sometimes and I go, can they not see? Do they not realize that God is either going to leave or has left? And they think that everything is going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. You see, when we continue to lay our head in the enemy's lap and believe that everything is going to turn out okay, we blind ourselves to the point that we think we're okay. That was Samson's problem. Notice he gets up, imagine. Everybody's got a different picture of Samson. I heard a guy preach a sermon about Samson, and he said, I believe Samson was about 5 foot tall and skinny. I don't know. That ain't how I picture him, but his theory was he was so strong, that's the way people would know that the Lord was on him, because he was so small in stature, like he it had to be God for him to be able to do. I don't know. It don't really matter. I don't care if he looked like The Rock or Pee Wee Herman. It doesn't matter, right? Here's what I can tell you. There had been times he got up out of her lap and the Lord was with him and he was able to accomplish whatever he wanted to accomplish. But this one time, he got up and he shook himself, and whether he flexed or not, we don't know. Whether he put his muscles up, we don't know. But he went through this routine like he always had, believing that always God was going to be with him and God was going to do what he needed him to do. But in reality, the Lord had left him. And notice what happens. He thought he was blind when he should have been able to see, but he suddenly becomes blind until the day he dies. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes, and they took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. I don't know why this piece is so heavy on me today. But people who can see, I'm not overly concerned about, because they can see. People who are blind and know they're blind, I believe are seeking help. They're feeling around trying to figure out what's right. It's the people who think they can see but they really can't that are weighing on my heart today. It's the people who have it completely wrong but are pretending like they're right. Who have determined in their heart that I'm going to do what I want to do no matter what the consequences are, with the belief that God is always going to reside with us. Listen, there can come a time when we stand and shake ourselves, flex our muscles, and call on the name of the Lord, but He is long gone because we thought we had light, but what we had was really darkness.